Hi, I'm John Vale. I'm a member of the Native Watercraft Pro Staff team, and today I'd like to talk to you about installing a fishfinder GPS unit on a Slayer Propel 10 kayak. One of the first things to decide is what type of electronics you want. Obviously there's different manufacturers and there's units with different features. The two primary considerations, I think, are: do you want to have only a fish finder, a sonar, or would you also like the GPS capability? In my first kayak I had a simple black and white fish finder, and that was great, but I soon realized I'd get a lot more information if I added the GPS capability. And now I'm running color GPS fish finders on another kayak, and I'm installing one today. So why do you want both parts? The fish finder component gives you two types of information. It tells you what does the bottom look like underneath you. Is it level? Are you on an uphill slope? Are you going downhill? Are there lumps or pockets? It also gives you some information about what may be in the water column. If you're looking for schools of fish that are parked in a certain area, it will tell you when you found that location. The GPS, on the other hand, gives you three different types of information that I find useful. First of all, it lets you know where you are in relationship to the map. Are you on an edge? Are you on flat water, deep, shallow? Are you approaching a particular structure? Secondly, it gives you your instantaneous speed through the water. I do a lot of trolling with light tackle, and knowing my speed through the water is very important for me to keep my lures where I want them in the water column. Thirdly, by having the chart plotter feature, it shows me exactly where I've been earlier in that trip or on a previous trip, and I can follow those trails to go over places where I've found fish in the past. I could have marked them with a waypoint or simply follow my trails. So for me, having both of those functions makes me a much more informed fisherman, helps me catch more fish. Installing electronics on your kayak is not difficult, but it does require a little bit of thought process, especially the first time you've done it. There are three primary components of the electronics that you need to worry about installing, attaching, and connecting. Those three pieces are the screen unit, with the screen and the controls, the transducer, which sends out the sonar signals and is attached by a cable to the back of the screen unit, and a power source. Most users will take a 12-volt battery of different sizes. This is the screen unit that I am installing today. It's made by Lowrance. It's the HDS5 Gen 2 series. I'd like to emphasize that there is not a single right or wrong way to install electronics on your kayak. Each user is going to find a way that meets their own needs, that has their own sense of what handiwork is required to put it in there, and so on. The installation I'm using today involves a very simple shoot through the hull method using a puck of putty to hold the transducer in place. I don't have to drill any holes, and I don't need any tools other than a wire stripper to make the electrical connections. Before you begin your installation, it's very important to do some advanced planning. As the old carpenter rule says, measure twice, cut once. I'd like to think that you want to think this through multiple times, put pieces into a position where you think they will work, and see how all that fits logistically for your needs. First off, take the unit out of its box, take a look at it, read the installation guide to find out how you make the connections. Look at what components or accessories are included. In my case, the screen unit, a power cable, a fuse holder, and the transducer is what comes standard with the equipment. I wanted to make sure I had all of the other necessary components for making the installation and have them on hand before I start. I certainly did not want to get into the middle of an installation and find that I didn't have a part, had to stop, go to the store and find it. The next thing we're going to look at is how do you install the screen unit. It's very important to put your screen unit in a place where it can be securely fastened, but is also readily accessible from your seating position. So you need to be able to reach out, particularly for the GPS function, to be able to push the buttons while underway. Secondly, you want to mount it in a place where it's not in the way of your propulsion system, whether that's a paddle or a propel. In this case, you could see the propel unit, which involves a pedaling motion. And So how can you mount that in such a way? I'm fortunate on the Slayer Propel 10 because it comes standard with quite a few different gear tracks, one on each side. These two shorter ones in the front here, and even some in the back. All right, I prefer using Scotty brand accessories. That's just my personal choice, and you can see that I've mounted some fish finders. Some rod holders here, one on this side, one on the other side, and two in the back using Scotty system. The mounting system that I like to use involves Scotty products. In this case, it's a little cylindrical device that slides into a gear track. You can see it's got a metal foot on the bottom. And what I do is I can slide it into this gear track and then tighten it, and that locks it in place. There's an upper collar here that can pivot, and that is how you release the pieces you put in there. I've also taken a Scotty device, a 272, that goes onto the bottom of the mounting bracket from my fishfinder GPS, and it has a Scotty accessory that just snaps right into the base unit and then has it locked in place. This allows the entire piece to swivel and be held securely in place. You can see that in the position I have it right now, as I would move the foot pedals around, it would bump into the unit. That's not going to be functional when I'm underway. But remember, this Propel is tilted in the up position. Once I lower it down into the hull, these foot pedals are going to be moved further back and out of the way. So this is actually a very good installation. The Slayer Propel 10 has only a limited amount of space in front of the cockpit and one point of access inside the hull. It's underneath this rubber cover. Let me remove that. When you look down in the hull, you can see that because it's right in the bow area, there's a lot of steep sides and some fairly sharp angles. That's going to make it a little more complicated to make the installations for the transducer and for the battery box. In the next step of the installation, we're going to talk about how do you install the transducer. Transducers send out electronical sonar signals that are received back by the same transducer, and this gives you a sense of how deep it is and what objects may be in the water column between you and the bottom. When you install transducers, it's important to put them into a position where there's a minimum amount of turbulence so that the signals that are coming back are going to be read as clearly as possible without interference. There are various ways to install transducers. I've installed them on powerboats using a transom mount where the transducer hangs right in the water. For kayaks, some people use that same method. They'll hang it off the back. Other methods that are common are using a scupper mount technique where you buy a particular type of transducer from the manufacturer that allows you to place it inside the scupper drain holes in your kayak. That way the transducer is in direct contact with the water. Other users like to hang them over the side using a transducer arm. That way you have the transducer directly in the water column itself. My personal preference uses yet another method that would be a shoot through the hull method. You are placing the transducer inside the hull and it's shooting through bedding material and then through the plastic layer of the hull. Because the plastic is so thin in a kayak, you can get very good sonar signals. I've been able to see a jig head bouncing up and down in 30 feet of water using a duck seal through hull mount installation before. So that's the technique I'm going to describe in a few minutes, is how to do it through the hull. I will give you a note of caution. If you install inside the hull that's not in direct contact with the water and you have a temperature sensor on your transducer, you will be measuring the temperature of the air inside the hull and not the water temperature. That can fluctuate, particularly in bright sunlight. If you need to know the precise temperature of the water from your transducer, then this is probably not the right mounting system for you. The way I fish, that's not critical, and it really simplifies matters for me to do it that way. A second note of caution, none of the units I've ever installed have down scanning capability. Some of the newer units are offering that, and if you choose to do through hull mounting for a down scan, you'll still get down scan signals. You may lose a little bit of sensitivity. I've never done it myself, but from what I've read on the internet, It is a minor loss of sensitivity and to some extent can be corrected by adjusting the sensitivity controls on your unit. In the next step, we're going to install the transducer. You can see the fairly flat space inside where that's going to go. Before we do that, we need to prepare the bedding material of duck seal and then also prepare the surface. So we're going to start by taking some rubbing alcohol and half of a brick of the duck seal material. This shows the duck seal putty. It comes in 1 pound blocks. It's purchased in the electrical supply aisle of a home store. And you could see there's about half of a brick left over here from a previous installation. It's a dark gray or black colored, very flexible putty material that can be molded into different shapes. But it also has a really strong adhesion. The rubbing alcohol is rubbed onto the surfaces where the materials will be stuck to remove any mold release oils or any other films. Okay, here's the half puck of duck seal. I'm going to take that and mold it into the shape. Okay, here you can see the pad of bedding material, the duck seal, that I've molded so it's slightly larger than the bottom of the transducer. The idea is we're going to stick this onto the hull next. Then I'm going to push the transducer into the duck seal and roll up the edges just a little bit to hold it in place. Alright, at this point I'm taking the pad of duck seal and I'm going to lay it at what I believe is a flat area inside the hull. I've already cleaned this with the rubbing alcohol to remove any mold release oils and films. Okay, I'm going to press that down tight and then I'm going to insert the transducer. Alright, next bring the transducer in. Position that. Whoops, backwards. I want to put the broad end facing backwards. Okay, got that in place. Maybe move it over just a little so it's centered better. As you're doing this, you want to do your best to avoid introducing any air bubbles into the process, okay? At this point, I'm going to fold up the edges to better lock the transducer into the position where I want it. Okay, at this point I'm going to take an extra strip of the duck seal and run it across the top to provide extra holding in place. I made this long slender piece and I'm going to take it, lay it across the top of the transducer and just squeeze that into place so that it holds everything together a little bit better. And I'm going to squish that just a little bit more to make sure I've got a nice tight connection. Okay, now I've got the transducer firmly cemented into place using that duck seal material. And if I need to, I can just take my fingertips and push and pull. And in 10, 20, 30 seconds, I can get that puck of material off of there. Nevertheless, that's going to be a very firm seal. The rest of the cable, which is a long cable because it's intended for powerboat use too, I've tied up and shoved into a little spot in the back. Left about 3 or 4 feet of line with a cable end like this. This then inserts into the back of the screen unit. Next, we're going to start in on the power supply portion of this installation. I'm using a 12-volt battery. In this case, it's a 12 amp hour battery. The batteries are rated in terms of amp hours. Previously, I've used a 5 amp hour and 7 amp hour battery, and that didn't always last as long as I liked. So I've moved up to a larger and heavier 12 amp hour battery. I keep it inside this plastic box with a snap-on locking lid. I've made a hole in one end to allow the power leads to come in and out. Now on my other installation, this rests in a nice comfortable place inside the hull or inside a storage compartment. In this installation, because of the way things are laid out, there is not really a good place just to let it sit loose. So in this case, I've decided I'm going to create a second plastic box that will be my housing. To level off the floor, I'm starting by adding some pieces of PVC pipe that I had laying around the house. I'm going to make a bed of duck seal material to seal that in place and level it off. And then I'm going to install, just by pressing down, this new plastic box, which looks like this. Once I've got that all installed and I'm ready to use the system, I can come out, set my battery box inside this new holding box, and use it for the trip. And at the end of the trip, simply lift this out and take it for recharging. I've completed making the pile of duck seal to make a bed for my plastic box. And I'm now going to take the plastic box and push it in place. I want to make sure this gets a nice tight seal in here. Then I'm going to take one extra piece of the putty at the end and push it in the back as an extra stop to hold it in place. And I'll go ahead and just mold that so it's exactly the way I want it. At this point, we're at the very final step of the installation, and that is connecting the wiring. We have one more cable that goes to the back of the power unit and ends up with little clips like this, spade connectors, that are used to connect onto the battery terminals. So here's how we go about it. If we look at the power cable that comes with the electronics, it has two separate pieces of the cable. The first piece of the cable has all these multicolored wires. This is not used for this particular installation. If you're putting this on a power boat where you have a networked installation, you would use these wires. But for this purpose, I'm just going to snip those off and place a wire nut on there to hold it. On the other end, this is where we're most concerned. You have a red, a yellow, and a black lead. We don't need the yellow one. We do need the red and the black. I'm going to snip off the yellow one, and then we'll proceed from there. I'm going to use these little butt connectors to make the connection. At this point, you'd have the red and the red and the black wires, which would carry the positive, negative current from the battery. I don't like connecting directly from this piece to the battery, and there's two things I put in between. First of all, the Lowrance recommends that you have a fuse in line on the hot lead to protect your electronics, and they provide this little fuse holder. So I'm going to splice this in end to end using the butt connector. And because I don't like connecting these very slender wires over to the battery, I've added 3-foot lengths of 14 gauge wire that I'm going to, again, butt splice one onto the black onto the black over here, and the red onto one end of this fuse holder. That'll give me all the wires I need to go over to the battery, and then I'll finish it off with the little spade connectors. So here we have the standard completed wiring harness. You can see the blue end, which is the cable that plugs in the back of the screen unit. You can see the end that had the wires we don't need. I blocked that off with a wire nut. I've connected the leads from the cable to the fuse holder on the red side, which then goes to a thicker wire. And I've connected on the black side the thicker wire. And they both end in the spade connectors. This is all ready to put together. Screw the two connectors in the back of the electronics unit, plug the battery leads into the battery terminal, and everything's ready to roll. Once you've crimped the butt connectors with the two wires coming into them, there's still an opportunity for water to get in at the metal parts and lead to corrosion. So what I typically will do is I will fill in the ends with one of these substances, either liquid electrical tape, goop, or some type of marine adhesive and sealant. That way I can plug off those ends and keep the water from getting at the connectors where there's going to be corrosion. Alright, now for the final part. We've connected the two power leads to the battery terminals inside the box. I'm going to set the box into my new holding bin, and then I'm going to come around and hit the start button. And voila, it turns on and it works. In the final application, you're going to want to put the rubber hatch cover back on and have the 3 black cables come up through one small section of that lid that is not firmly attached. The rest of the perimeter of the rubber lid is snapped down tight. This, to me, provides a pretty good degree of security from having water coming in. Thank you for watching this video. I hope this is helpful to you as you go ahead and install your own unit.